Pixar ever going to make a Cars 4? That's something that's been swirling around in my brain for the last little while. Is there going to be a continuation of the franchise? It feels like every single year there's some sort of different answer to that question. Sometimes you'll get a snippet or a soundbite of some important creative team member talking about how they have big plans for the future. Other times there'll be rumour kills released, and then more often than not, just radio silence. However, just last year there was a survey at D23 Brazil which hinted that the film could very well be in the works right now. Which means that there's only really one thing to do, and that's to unleash a whole horde of baseless speculation. Good thing for me is that that's what we do best here on this channel. Here we go. If the leaks and articles are correct and Cars 4's on the horizon, is there an actual reason why they should make this movie? Or is it a franchise that's dead in the water and should remain gone? I think first of all, we should spend some time looking at the finances of everything that's going on here. I feel like the Cars franchise has always sat in a strange place in the Pixar filmography, in that for how prominently it seems to be pushed, it didn't really seem like a franchise that was all that lucrative. In fact, in terms of its box office, it's always felt like it lags behind other films from the same era, so you can't even use the crazy ticketflation driving box office records in today's day and age to try to explain away its failures. Cars has always been less than its peers. Look at the 2000s. In 2001, Monsters Inc. grossed $528 million. Finding Nemo in 2003 grossed $871 million. Huge for the era. In 2004, The Incredibles grossed $631 million. Cars in 2006 dropped to $461 million, which was in turn the lowest gross for the studio since 1998's Bug's Life, when the studio was still brand new and finding its feet, growing its audience. The sequel film that came years later in 2011 ended up grossing a respectable $559 million, which, don't get me wrong, that's good, but at the same time I'm not going to lie and say I'm all that impressed. I mean, it's a Pixar sequel. Let's give some other comparisons. Toy Story 2 grossed $511 million, and that was over 10 years before that, back in 1999. Toy Story 3 in 2010 grossed $1 billion. Monsters University, a prequel, managed $743 million, almost $200 million ahead of the pace. Finding Dory got $1 billion. The Incredibles 2 got $1.2 billion. Toy Story 4, $1 billion. Inside Out 2, $1.6 billion. And very, very briefly had the record for the highest grossing animated film ever. Do you see the difference here? All of these sequels, prequels, and franchise players did far better than the film that came before, as they built on the established audience nostalgia, as well as drawing new fans to tickets. Cars 2 did that, but at a massively lesser scale. The only way to make it seem better is if you draw in the box office bomb that was the Toy Story spin-off film Lightyear that grossed a dismal $226 million. Even then though, you can explain that away as people not being sure about Pixar post-COVID, since their films had been rapidly turning up on Disney Plus anyway, and they didn't want to spend extra money if they didn't have to. You can't make those excuses for Cars 2. Then Cars 3 came out in 2017, and it was clear the magic had been lost. For the era that it released, right in that golden age of box office smash hits, this was a practice in humiliation. It grossed a sad $383 million in an era where the studio was making the big bucks. And it is the third worst pre-COVID box office for the studio, narrowly beating out A Bug's Life and The Good Dinosaur, although considering the context of the time period, A Bug's Life probably did better for the studio than Cars 3 did when you actually think about it. It's not like Cars 3 had an especially difficult run either. It was released during the third weekend of Wonder Woman's run alongside a bunch of lower tier films, and it came out on top of the box office. Even then though, it was the lowest Pixar opening weekend in some time, and the lowest of the Cars franchise, and was then dethroned in a week by Transformers The Last Night. However, I think there is a bit of an age demographic difference between Transformers and Cars 3, so really I think it was just a flop. Thus, when you look at it like that, I honestly question why they'd ever think about making these movies again. They seem like abject failures financially, and in the end that's what the studio cares most about, money. In defense of continually making them over the years, I've seen people talk about how they do crazy big toy sales for the franchise. Okay, that's all well and good, but you can't really verify that easily. I'll just have to take that at face value. It does make me question though, if people don't go to see these movies anyway, as proven by the box office gross, then why would they be buying the toys? Were the movies popular on home video or now on streaming? Is that how they got their popularity? Or is it, and I'm just spitballing here, is it possible that people are just more willing to buy toys that have Disney branding and thus you never actually need to make any of these movies? They could have just released car toys? Why not just mass produce cartoon car merch and cut out the middleman of the box office flop movies? Would that not make the most sense? I just don't see how you could financially justify a film that's almost certainly going to end up being a bomb. We're in the era of sequels, that's true, but these sequels have never sold, and in my eyes the franchise is all but dead in the water. I think the only way you could probably convince me is if the streaming numbers were ludicrously high and put other Pixar content to shame. But it would have to be leaps and bounds ahead of the other franchises. Otherwise, I wouldn't be shocked to once again see it underperform in the cinemas. Like I said, if the toys sell, it's all well and good, but that's never heralded a shift in the franchise's fortunes ever. Don't get me wrong though, I know it does seem like I'm going all out to provide an objective reason as to why they shouldn't be making any more of these films, but that doesn't mean I hate them though. To tell you the truth, I actually have a lot of fondness in regards to the first movie especially. It's a fun little tale that, whilst not perfect, is a good way to spend an hour and a half. That's where it ends for me though. One and done, because whilst the first one's fine, the second is truly so bad that it doesn't even feel like it was made by Pixar. Meanwhile, Cars 3 is just deeply forgettable as a movie. That and The Good Dinosaur are the two Pixar films I probably have the foggiest memories in regards to. Hell, scratch that, I can at least remember some scenes from The Good Dinosaur. I legitimately can't think of a single thing that happens in Cars 3 other than there's a yellow car who trains the others and lightning gives her a chance to race at the end, I think. That's it. I think it's fair to say it's just a film that exists. I don't think it was bad or anything, or good. It just floats there in the silent void with no memorable qualities whatsoever. However, once again, we have to take that survey at face value and assume that for some reason, they are having this franchise make a comeback. Maybe they've been inspired by the success of Cars on the Road or something, and think that that means they can defeat the downward financial trend. But do they have the narrative ability to do so? How much story potential is there for a cinematic release anyway? The first film is very clear-cut. It has a story that works and makes sense for what they're doing. The young, arrogant rookie race car Lightning McQueen is eager to win the Piston Cup at any cost. He disdains his sponsors who he views as small-time and lame, and he thinks he's capable of total victory without the help of a pit crew. He favours speed and dominance over everything else, and so right when he's about to win the cup, his tyres blow out, which allows two other racers, Strip Weathers and Chick Hick, to take the three-way tie. Thus, they need to replay the race in a tiebreaker. On his way to the race, Lightning finds himself lost in the middle of nowhere and turns up in Radiator Springs, which ends up with him destroying the road and being forced to pave a new one. This leads him on a journey of self-discovery as he bonds with the various townspeople. He finds a best friend in Mater, a local yokel. He falls in love with Sally and finds a mentor in Doc Hudson, who teaches him about true racing skills after revealing that he was the famous racer, the Hudson Hornet, who was a shining star until an accident ruined his career. These life lessons help him grow from arrogant rookie to somebody who genuinely cares about other cars, the compassionate and mature racer. Thus, in the rematch, when Chick makes the King spin out and crash, Lightning forfeits and allows Chick to win so he can double back and ensure that Weathers is able to finish his final race. He finishes his hero's journey and proves that winning is not the be-all and end-all of what makes a successful person. It's the quality of their character. Hell yeah, great story, but I'll be honest, even from here, there wasn't really much more you could do with it. Hence why I think the second film was largely about Mater. Ugh. You know what I hate? When a studio notices that a side character's become popular, but in the context of being a comedy side character. And so they think that this means they should go all in on giving them their own spin-off. What's worse is that it wasn't a spin-off and was legitimately just a sequel and pretty much shuffled Lightning McQueen off to the side to not be involved for most of the movie. Not exactly an inspiring start. However, like I said, it's very clear they were running out of ideas already, and so they made this strange spy thriller film instead of a sports comedy film the first one had been. It was, and is, in my opinion, the worst Pixar film of all time. And part of me wonders if its enduring legacy was a big reason as to why the third film failed at the box office, despite being nowhere near as bad. I kind of think that has to be the reason, right? The third film then took the other major story direction that logically would have made sense for the franchise. The tale of Lightning McQueen, who in the first film was a rookie, is now an ailing racer who is clearly on his way out. He's struggling to compete with the younger generation, and is able to train up a successor who will eventually turn into a racing sensation just like he was. This is pretty much the plot of Cars 3 in very simple terms, but it does beg the question going forward. What would a fourth movie even look like? How do you make it so the film is actually interesting and doing something fresh, whilst also having some sort of drawing power for audiences? I'm not sure you can, to tell you the truth, but I will give it a go here and now. I think the first idea would be to take the Lightning McQueen arc to the natural conclusion. Turn him into an old guru in Radiator Springs, who a young race car comes to for training, or maybe a young car growing up in Radiator Springs needs to learn to race for some reason or other, and Lightning McQueen goes full Mr. Miyagi and adopts them as his new apprentice. Honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, this is probably the best thing they could do for a Cars 4. They get to keep Lightning McQueen around for a little longer without it feeling forced, and you can have a full hero's journey for this new car character that doesn't end with them entering and winning a professional race with no experience outside of simulations and a couple of practice runs. I kind of like the idea of them building up to this big race, which in the end is not all that important. So it's like a local amateur race or qualifiers or something like that, but it has enough emotional depth and stakes in terms of what it means to the character to make it work. Just like the fights in Karate Kid, both the OG and the Jaden Smith reboot. These are just local competitions. But since it's about standing up to bullies and fighting for what's right, there's significant emotional stakes behind what's going on. I think that's probably the best way to do things. It keeps the main character around and also potentially sets up the story for the future with a new character who'd ideally become rather popular. It would wrap up that pathway of Lightning becoming the next Doc Hudson, going from arrogant and youthful racer to a grizzled old coach trying to hammer life lessons into the head of a character who they feel is just like they were at that point in their life. I realise that this is a pretty similar concept to what Cars 3 was, but for me the idea here is to build up this new protagonist from the ground up, showcasing them in a more low-stakes environment instead of having them be a crazy good champion racer in the top professional environment right off the cuff. Otherwise, where the hell does the character go in a future film? However, that being said, since the box office for the last film was just straight garbage, they could choose to simply put a pin in the idea of bringing back Lightning McQueen at all, in favour of doing a soft reboot with fresh characters. Obviously, you can set it in the same universe and timeline, maybe even make some reference to Lightning or have him appear in a cameo role, and it could potentially work. This probably would be the more risky way to take things because you don't have the benefit of the doubt that might draw the audience in, but then again it could pay off as well, since it allows you to try to do something completely fresh, and since the box office for the franchise has always been low, and by the end it was terrible, you could get away with trying something new and by doing so, perhaps kick off a new era for the franchise that now follows these next generation characters in the same way that the Karate Kid inspired idea from before would hopefully do the same. Get people invested in a fresh protagonist. The only issue is you don't have the passing of the torch moment, which could make it harder to care about the brand new characters. I do think there's some wiggle room here. Potential directions you could take the story and the franchise. I think they shouldn't. The goose is absolutely cooked, overcooked, it's dead, it's burnt. And if they keep beating the dead horse, it's just going to look ridiculous. They have a lot of great films in their filmography that could work with a sequel and potentially make them a whole lot of money and earn a whole lot of acclaim. Cars isn't one of them anymore. I hope it stays gone. It's time to move on. Anyway though, with all that being said, these have just been my opinions and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the idea of Cars 4? Do you think they should make it or should the franchise be put on ice for good? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment and subscribe and let me know.